All
Hi,
right, Jake.
I'm Jake Bohall, co-founder of Hive Digital. This is our first episode of Hive Digital Raw, which I can't redo that because it's raw. So hopefully that lands. We're gonna be using this series as an opportunity to kind of just share some of the conversations that we typically have internally as an organization. We keep talking about these things and realize that this context could be helpful for others. So we wanted to record it and make it available for you. And this is Jake Stewart.
Hey guys, Jake Stewart here, Director of Marketing at Hive Digital. Jake and I have these types of conversations all the time, on a week to week and a day to day basis. And we thought, you know, there's so much that comes out of those conversations that it would be meaningful for clients to understand what our thought processes is and kind of how we're approaching handling the workload that comes to us and kind of what strategic partnership we need to provide for them that we thought, let's record the thing. Let's get it out there in the universe and, see what comes of it and allow you guys to ask follow-up questions, etc. Reach out to us. We're happy to chat. Um, Today we're going to talk about enterprise clients, how we handle these large enterprise level marketing needs from both a search engine optimization perspective, but really across our entire product offering suite, what it means to orient to what's happening at an enterprise organization, and our years of experience doing that. So, Jake, one of the things, man, that just it crops up for us a lot, even with the long-term enterprise client relationships we have, some of the newer uh, enterprise client relationships that we have. A lot of agencies are claiming out there, of course, they do the enterprise work, and that's something that, everybody has that right to come out there and say, I'm curious what that means for us. There's this large organization that sometimes is hard to change, but at the same time is presented with these very now realities at the point of contact level. Somebody who has a lot of influence sees a article out there or goes to a conference, etc., and wants to pivot quickly. So that's kind of a tough balance, man. We've been doing that for a lot of years, and it's sort of the reality of what happens. But man, from your perspective, you know, how do we handle that? You've been doing this for a long time with very large clients, not new to you. Just curious what your overall perspective on that is.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we think about an enterprise client, the first thing that comes to mind is like it's a Fortune 500. It's like this like super large organization. A lot of times, I think it is how we service the client, right? So like enterprise in my mind, like when I'm thinking about it, is um, how the client relationship is structured and how work gets delivered. And so, a lot of like smaller clients, it's really straightforward. You have like one point of contact. It's this guy who does all of the work himself or coordinates, with some other vendors, but ultimately there's one key person that you're talking to that's responsible for interpreting, execution, budget buy-in, and all of those things. So small business, it's, the owner or like the one person that they have in marketing, the end. So when I think about enterprise, it is companies in which we have multiple contacts that we have to serve and promote, right? Like we want all of our contacts working with us to be able to look good inside of their organization. So we've got to deal with like helping them develop their skills and show off the value that they're bringing through their relationship with us. um, Enterprise clients generally have more people that are serving our needs internally. So like they have a content team internally, they've got an outreach, they're doing sales and outreach as a whole nother department, and like all these different facets that we have to they have their own dev firm. They're not leaning on us to also do their dev work and all these things. So they have, we have multiple points of contact that we're just interfacing with that are driving the project. We have multiple points of contact on the execution side. So like, the marketing director is going to hand off, the technical audit work for us to coordinate with their development firm. And I think one of the key things is, just the politics, that get involved, right? Like there's like the pressure that our points of contact have on,
Mhm.
delivery times and, those kinds of things, really carry a lot of weight. And then not hurting people's feelings.
Mhm.
Like you have two different points of contacts and they contradict each other. And like
Yeah.
you're in a meeting and you have to decide, like, how do I communicate this without throwing Sally or Joe under the bus?
Yeah.
So, for enterprise ready, in my mind is, we have a team that is adept at working through those types of relationships. We coordinate, with other vendors, whether it's third party vendors that you've contracted with, if you need us to vet third party vendors, or if it's an internal team that we're coordinating. And so, we end up in sort of segmenting the work that we provide and how we present it with, here's C-suite level, like how do you look good, and just communicate, the basics of what's needed, what's the impact, and what is the budget, the kind of thing, timeline. And then we have like a different team that, we're providing granular details on, action items, and we're pushing for things to get done, and we're trying to buy our way into their priority queues and all of those things. And like there's a lot of work that's involved in doing that. That is, in my mind, that's what enterprise means. For a small business, the owner is the dictator of the business, and if we say do this and he tells someone to do it, the end. And there's no,
Mm.
vying for prior, or trying to get priority and leveraging, how do I sneak this into the sprint that's coming up because I know it's important and has this, broader reach. And I think, that's kind of would be the last point top of mind, is that in an enterprise relationship, we're having to hold the context of how all of these disparate parts work together. It's like, every product manager has their own mission and they don't care about anybody else, right? Like product A team wants their product to be the best, get the most conversions. And if they had it their way, they would delete anything else off the site that wasn't product A. And so we have to balance,
Yeah.
those types of relationships.
For sure. And sometimes I think that's a fair assessment, right? You've got a lot of competing priorities for a lot of competing teams, right? Product managers want their products to succeed. You have your own KPIs when you're inside of those organizations that you're trying to hit. There's also, and I mean, just from working with enterprise relationships, and then for anybody who's out there, listening to us, before I was working on the agency side, I existed in a lot of these large scale enterprise organizations, and I can say that sometimes what happens is those POCs that we're working with have to handle the thing that's in front of them, right? This thing got dropped in front of them right now, and now that's the highest priority thing. So a part of
And it's
what you were
on fire.
talking,
It is
yeah, it's
on
on
fire.
fire right now.
Nothing
Do
else
it
can
right
happen.
now, right? Nothing else matters. The exclusion of every other thing that's on your priority, go do this because
Yes,
boss or big
yesterday's
boss or big
fire.
boss said go do that, right? That other fire
Yesterday's
that's still
fire.
burning doesn't matter. So a lot of what you're talking about, Jake, is kind of extending the bench. How do we extend the bench? How do we coordinate with other vendors? How do we help to assess those things? But I really like what you said about understanding the context. Because when multiple POCs that we're working with at enterprise organizations get that fire thing put in front of them, because we are existing in the enterprise sort of environment, but as a third party voice and strategic partner, we can say, hey, that's important. We agree. We understand why it's important. Are you thinking about the way that impacts this other piece of contextual information? And we can bring that conversation back. And sometimes it's go do it anyway, right? But sometimes it's maybe I need to go have additional conversations internally, et cetera. But we can help to direct sort of what's happening in the larger context when a POC just had to put out a fire, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think a part of that as well is like, a lot of times, our contacts will come to us and say like, "Hey, we have this issue, or this decision was being made," right? And we have to, as a third party, we get the privilege of being able to say like, "That's a dumb idea. Don't do that," right? Like whereas like our point of contact can't tell their boss
Right.
that's dumb, right? And so there's this balancing act of, like helping them communicate why bad ideas are bad ideas, or how it has these downstream impacts that like oftentimes enterprises are working in silos, and like we get to surface those moments and say like, hey, like this other team's been building this tool for the last 3 months. You don't even know it exists, and you're trying to build a similar tool over here with this other team. Like you guys need to stop and take a minute, if you're competing for, some internal reason of, who's going to have ownership or own the budget later, or vetting, split testing vendors and stuff like that. Like that's one thing, but like a lot of times they're just wasting time and money
Mhm.
chasing the same thing from five different angles because everybody, for obvious things, everybody sees it and wants to work on it. And then you have the if it's successful, like everybody wants credit for it as well, and
Mhm.
internal, in a large organization, and so like helping maintain those lines. So I think, for us, finding ways that we can, extend what, especially in an enterprise environment, like they have teams internally, right? So it's like, we don't want to take their work from them and just burn hours for fun. Like, we want to put the ownership and the education back on the internal team so that they can learn and grow and hopefully not ask us these same questions about process or whatever again. Or we can build tools so that they could do it on their own. But it's like, a key part of enterprise is not um, solving the problem directly. A lot of times it's empowering this enterprise to be able to solve these problems on their own. Because if we tried to take on everything in enterprise, we effectively have to build the entire enterprise marketing, the entire team. And so for us, it's like, how do we find ways that we can, get you in the right path so that you can hire against, these needs internally and train somebody who's, going to be your expert for your vertical business, etc., and make sure that they're doing what they need, and then we're here to guide you and make sure you don't, waste time hiring somebody for a short-term position, or hire the wrong person and those kinds of things.
Mhm. I mean, and some of that is, also it's the translation work, right? So we have all of these, initiatives that we're trying to help various POCs navigate. We're trying to help the enterprise be able to be successful with. But there's a piece of that, though, that is part of the enterprise work is being able to help translate that need so that key decision makers are confident in the decision to fund that, to hire that person, to pursue that outcome, to build that tool, et cetera. And so there's a lot of that work that I think happens. And so it's translating both, kind of what the need is versus for whatever particular sort of service offering we're hired for, but then helping various levels of POC translate that up or
and
across.
prior and prioritize it, right?
Sure.
Because like there's always a need to, there's a fire every day for something new, right? And they want it done now. And so I think a large ask, that we end up carrying is, how do we actually determine if this is a priority that needs to be done now, or if this is just, something a C-suite read and, the most recent blog post somewhere and wants to have it done today because, you know a spokesperson of the SEO industry said that it's amazing and it changes the world, and not always true. And we have to manage those asks and prioritizing on what do we have in the queue, what will this actually move, because otherwise, we're playing whack-a-mole with, somebody's, spam in their inbox.
Mhm. I mean, we were talking a lot about fires and kind of the priority aspect, the thing that's like right in front of you that all of a sudden now is the thing that you need to do. And there are certainly emerging trends in the way that, customers are interacting with brands, right, that are causing a lot of urgency from the C-suite level down for us to solve this thing immediately, and for the enterprise needing to solve that thing immediately. And sometimes, in the haste for speed, right? We also have to be able to consider what have we built and what is put at risk when we move too quickly,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so Jake, I guess from your perspective, how do you balance that sort of speed versus safety need when we're being asked to do a whole lot of things at once?
uh I try.
I
I
feel you.
try to balance it, right? Like, because things come in either this was already sold and promised to the C-suite, right? So now it's like we have to do it. Like we worked with a client a couple of years ago or so. Like they decided to split off a product into its own domain. It was a terrible decision. And we told them, like, this is a bad decision. We're splitting authority. We've got to do all of this remapping, and I promise, and 6 months you're going to regret it, and then we've got to fold it back in, and we're confusing the world. And they're like, suck it up, man. Like, we sold it, and that's what it is. If it's a bad idea, we'll fix it later. So like there's sometimes like we don't have a choice. Like we have to move with speed because it was sold to, on an investor call to shareholders and like it's coming. Like we try to balance it. Like how do we mitigate it, right? So there's this side of, you know, just providing the service that's we're asked to do because we don't have a choice. And then the things that we can pad, right? Like there is an ask for like, oh, we want to create markdown versions of all of our pages for AI, and it's like we don't need to do that right now. Like this technology isn't fully developed. There's potential for creating duplicate content, and like our content, it's not even that great. So if we did this, like before we actually audit our content, now like we just like accelerated the LLM's ability to understand how disconnected some of our content is with today's reality. It's like outdated, 5 years old versions, those kinds of things. um so I think there's this challenge with moving fast because we have a demand and no path out, and and for those things we have to mitigate the risks. And so it's being able to see what those risks are ahead of time so that we can create escape hatches or quick abilities to roll back, right? So like when we do this redirect mapping, like let's preserve it in this way, or let's handle redirects in this method so that when this is determined to be a bad idea, like we can quickly undo it. So there are those kinds of approaches. And then just like the general handling of, how different asks carry, risks. I mean, ultimately is like everything is a risk analysis, especially in enterprise, because like anytime you touch one thing, it has a cascade effect. Like we changed this now, our support system, our support services and support content is going to be different. Or like we want to load all of these videos into YouTube, and it's like, well, how is that going to impact your training revenue or your, the other programs that you've got running that also have benchmarks and teams that have KPIs and OKRs that they have to hit. And if you ruin it for them, like especially if Hive is like, then they hate us. And when I want to go back and ask them to do something later, they're just like, yeah, you ruined my bonus last quarter, man. Get out of here. So there is, it's challenge, and
Oh yeah, for sure.
and it's different. It's different for every scenario and every org, but true problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, sometimes the risk is, not that the idea is a bad idea, Jake, right? Not that it's a bad idea, not that we shouldn't be pursuing that rolling out, but sometimes it's, and what I kind of view as kind of one of Hive's role in working with enterprise is, did you consider who needed to know that information for that change? Like, did you inform development that this aspect was changing? Did you inform the training team that this was changing so that they could make adjustments to take advantage? So then the thing changes, and if the group didn't know, all
Yeah.
of a sudden they're operating on old protocols, and now you're working against yourself.
Yeah, or what happens a lot is like, or this thing is getting prioritized, and there was already a plan. Like there was already a plan to get there, and like we haven't done the fundamental. Like we don't have like the node pages. We can't build an overarching overview page if we don't have those outbound paths for users. And so sometimes like personas is a great one, right? Like they want to do all of this work, and it's like, well, you don't actually have any persona landing pages, and so being able to do this other cool thing that you've now made a high priority, if we try to jump the queue, we're going to end up with some fragmented, terrible user experience. We'll deliver what you want, but it's going to suck and it's not going to convert, right? So like there's this aspect of how we communicate the challenge so that ultimately the C-suite who's making a lot of these calls can understand why this needs to stay on ice. Like there are these dependencies we have to accomplish first, or moving this to the top of the line means our QA and content audit cleanup, or these site migrations have to take a back burner because your dev team doesn't have the resources to do everything all at once. So like we want to slot it into the queue, and we want to make sure that it's got the right priority for what big picture that roadmap looks like for your existing dev teams who are mid sprint or mid project and all kinds of stuff.
You're right, Jake, that, we've got C-suite members who are going to ultimately be making a lot of these decisions, and part of the goal is to make sure that they are well informed. I think we would be remiss if we didn't spend some time, Jay, talking about what the big thing in front of everybody's face right now is, including C-suite members who understand the shifting landscape around, yes, absolutely money. But how that's playing out now is we've been working on these models of brand interaction and visibility for a long time inside of the Google search space, and that ground is shifting. And
Mm.
it's not completely shifting, but certainly the way that people are interacting with brands is shifting because of the introduction of LLMs, right? Because AI is becoming a commonplace usage for people in the universe, right? Who are interacting with brands. So, Jake, that's in front of everybody. What are some of the experience even now in the first, 2 years of this really being prevalent that you're seeing is mostly coming through, from that C-suite that the ask is being made? How do we optimize so that we can remain visible, so the brand remains engaged in these spaces? And then how are we translating back?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of challenges with this, right? Like because the C-suite comes to the scenario and like they're like LLMs or AI is a perfect example, right?
Mhm.
Like they come in and they're like we need to be able to tell our shareholders that we're leveraging AI in our products so that our products are better, that we're leveraging it in our marketing so our marketing's more efficient and all of these types of things. And so like the communication with them is like how do we find ways that we can balance implementing this in a way that gives you those savings and gives you as C-suite the fodder you need for shareholders and investors and that kind of thing. How do we balance like implementing this in tiers with, quite frankly, an experimental technology, right? Like LLMs are not reliable to solve our problem. I mean, they're really great at coming up with creative ideas. We can use it to like code things so much faster and build tools. And like, I mean, there are certainly benefits that come from it. But a lot of companies are, they just want AI, right? So like somebody will go and build a tool that just asks the LLM, like, what's the best page on my site for this? And like they take it at face value. They ask the same question 10 minutes later, they get a different answer. And like those things don't work. So, one of the things that we have to focus on is educating a lot of C-suite on how do LLMs actually work? Like they want more visibility for their brand. And then we end up in this discussion where they're like, well, we updated these pages and like we expect the LLM to now know we changed our product names or like, we launched this new feature and these kinds of things. And like, why isn't it in there yet? And so we have to explain, this difference between, foundational layer of like what's baked into LLM memory versus the retrieval layer and like, which is effectively SEO. And like, and like, my favorite is just like this running challenge that we keep seeing where it's like, tell me what you're doing for AI visibility, but it can't be SEO work. We've already won for SEO, and like they don't want to hear about how you're doing any SEO work. They want to hear about just what is it for AIs and LLMs. And it's like, well, we can update Wikipedia. We can go to the places that the models use to build their context. But that'll take the next release of an LLM version in hopes that they used this source as their training data before any of that would get picked up. So like ultimately we need to do SEO so that the LLMs RAG models, the retrieval engines, are able to find pages and content that's related. And so like you know, and then being able to communicate like here's the cost, right? Like if you're wanting to do LLM only and this like here's what we're paying, and we don't actually have any way of really measuring how much you're getting back out of that. Like traditional like organic paid like these have been around long enough. There's data, there's tools that we've built. We can see the traffic and know where they're coming from and what they were clicking on. With the LLMs, like they're slowly opening it up, and I'm guessing as providers like ChatGPT open up ads, like they're going to have to provide more reporting layers, provided you've got the 50K a month to experiment with them. Like there's like reporting layers that should become available over time to help support them driving, your budgets up so they can make money. So I don't know if that answered the question or if I just went off on a tangent.
Well, I mean, I think that all of those items are relevant, Jake, that we do have sort of an alignment kind of education item that has to get, I think, drawn out inside of this AI LLM conversation with, experts who really are understanding what's happening in those space. And there's the reality of like some people, some agencies, et cetera, are well positioned to be able to have those conversations around AIs, LLMs, what signals can get sent there, how optimization can happen in reality, but also with the understanding that what makes those agencies and those partners really good is that they understand that conversation is evolving and in its very early stages.
Traditional challenge has been like basic stuff, right? Like you have really old content on the site, it's out of date. We need to invest, you know, I don't know, 10 grand into, auditing and having somebody rewrite this content and improve it. I think those are a lot of the harder conversations to have with C-suite because they're like, well, how much money is that going to make? And it's like, well, you know, technically, it doesn't make you any money like in a one-to-one kind of way. It's, like, this traditional like death by 1,000 cuts, model with your rankings. Like if your content is confusing, then search engines, LLMs are not able to trust you or the pages that they're reading because you contradict yourself from page to page. So I can't tell you like the actual dollar amount that you're going to sell a new business by cleaning up your old and crusty content, but we know for certain that it's holding you back. So I think, depending on the C-suite contact and their personal goals, we have to kind of figure out how to tie those things together because ultimately they're driven for driving up share prices or just lowering a beta, like all these different factors that really matter to them, like their job to be done is making the business look better on paper.
Mhm.
And our job is to make sure that they have something to justify and support that. And coming to a C-suite person with things like content auditing and cleanup, like they don't care. Like they're
Yeah.
like, how do I improve my rankings? It's like, well, like here's the roadmap that we have, and here's 20 different actions that have to be taken to move this needle, and we have
Mhm.
to touch them all because it's a multifaceted approach, and there's no one dial that there's no silver bullets in marketing, right? Like the closest thing you can get is I can pay for this ad on this keyword and get a person to my site. That's the closest thing to a silver bullet in marketing is paid advertising. That's why Google's made so much money off of it.
Mhm.
Everything else is about, like in social, it's like building your brand,
Uh,
context, building, the sentiment around your brand and comments that happen and showing that your brand is actually active and real, not so much that people are clicking on that LinkedIn post and then going and making a purchase today. It's we're building a context and a
mhm.
reputation that other engines like Google's traditional search, LLMs, and so forth use as a way to separate your business from all the illegitimate ones that are out there. And so,
Mhm.
SEOs have ruined a lot of stuff over the years. And it's really required, real businesses to raise the bar on covering all of these bases to be legit.
Yeah.
Because if you're not in all of these social networks, you look like you could be one of these fly by night sites.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think this isn't this need, like this sort of tension between show me the ROI and then what marketers and some others inside of organizations understand as vital to being able to be an effective brand in the space, be a trusted brand in the space. That tension isn't new. It happened around social revolution. It's now happening more, even more again around some of these AI asks. But it's hard to be able to go to a C-suite member and they say, "What's the ROI of this?" And be able, in my metaphor has been playing out for me in 10 years. Well, what's the ROI of breathing? Right? What's the ROI of existing in a way that can be trusted? That's hard to prove out, and so there is that challenge that we face of needing to translate that into meaningful, sort of on paper numbers for C-suite.
Yeah, there's like a metaphor that I also use is like the doctor, right? Like I'm a doctor, and you come to me and you're like, I want to be more healthy. I want to live longer. Like I have these goals,
Mhm.
right? And then you're told like, well, you should quit smoking or like you should exercise more. And it's like, well, what's the ROI on quitting smoking? I love that. And like, and so somewhere somebody did some study and was like, well, every cigarette adds, takes away 30 days of your life or like whatever this is, right? Or it's like, but telling you to like go walk I can't, as a doctor, I can't tell you like, well, you're going to live a year longer now that you're walking every day. We can just say like the things that we do measure, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, like those things have noticeable differences, but the overall KPI of your longevity still a wild card. And so I think, like there's that same sort of metaphor applies in a lot of what we do, especially like in the SEO space where, it is everything from URL structure to, how we gate user generated content to the articles we're creating and like fixing alt text. Like some of these things don't really move the needle. Some of them will move the needle in combination with other efforts. But ultimately, they're moving a needle that we're watching, right? Like, what is your ratio of high value content to low value content? Like, we understand that to mean like you're generally more trustworthy, but not necessarily like now you're going to get 1,000 more visitors. Um, so tying that back to actual business outcomes has been a challenge forever, right? Like even the idea of like, well, if we were to like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like if we build these links and get you to rank in position one, then we can estimate how much traffic you might get in position one based off of current traffic shaping of rankings. Position one gets X%, etc. But how much of that traffic is actually converting? You don't rank there, so you don't know what the conversion rates are. So like everything is just this sort of like, you know, pulling it out, trying to just get something that's close enough to communicate the value and the priority, but we can't necessarily tie it to like an exact benchmark of like, we're going to increase revenue by X. Like we can estimate, we can hope, like if all of our assumptions are correct, this is what it looks like. But there's nobody can tell you that, adding this piece of content will increase your revenue by X number of dollars, or moving your ranking, 3 positions is going to increase. Like we could say it will definitely increase, right? You're getting more traffic. We know that growth is that way. But how much growth, we have to explore and test and see like how do these changes have an impact? And when we see this impact, what did that have on revenue? Now we can start to predict what could happen in the future, but ultimately it's a prediction.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the things that we really ascribe to at Hive is this structure of discover, deliver, report, and then reflect, like that framework that we have, and that is really based on an iterative approach to the work that we do, right? Because, we do our best to set those benchmarks, have a good understanding, collective understanding of what success looks like. But ultimately, right, we're going to use this success benchmarks. We're going to change some things out there, and then we need time to see what those outcomes are. And so that plays out in a lot of different ways, right? So we've talked about the fire aspect, something needs to get now, or the where is it? And part of the challenge is defining that iterative process and making sure that we have buy-in so that our POCs aren't, you know, criticized too heavily, right, for the outcome that they see. And so part of the work is translating that framework so that everybody in the organization is committed to that testing methodology, right? What comes next? I lost you, Jake. You're on mute.
That was it. That was it. My wife was running a blower in the other room. Like mute
This is Hive
quickly.
Raw, man. This
And
is
then I
Hive Raw.
texted her like, "Hey, I'm recording over here. Give me a second." Uh, it is raw.
It is
Um,
raw.
it is raw. Yeah, I mean, like the discover, the first stages, right? Like of any relationship that we have is like we have to figure out what's there. Like most clients, especially enterprise, like tracking is a beast, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
either
Oh yeah.
they either it's just so disjointed across different domains or different tech stacks and so forth, that just like as an agency coming in, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, can we actually trust anything that you're telling us right now? And like, the classic, with an LM, trust but verify. I mean, same thing with new client data, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's this aspect, especially on the enterprise side, where, well, I'll say on a small business side, it's harder to work with them because they don't want to pay for you to verify their GA4, right?
Yeah.
Like they just want to, let's go straight into SEO. At least on the enterprise side, like there is a desire to ensure that the metrics are measured and accurate because they're exploding larger budgets on
Mm.
decisions that are coming from their analytics data. And so, whether it's, tying in a platform like Mixpanel, where we're pulling in your CRM data with your stage pipelines, we're cross-referencing that with your traffic and your ad spend and those things, so we can get a bigger picture of from discovery through, like, the end of your client relationship, like what happened. Because one of the things that you can discover on that site is that a portion of users that come in through this channel, like, you may have high conversion rates, like your lead funnel is filling up quickly from traffic from this particular channel or these specific landing pages. But then when you look at like the big picture, you see, like, the attrition rates on those accounts after 6 months is just astronomical compared to other channels where you might retain a client for years. And so, there's strategies that we have to focus on, this short-term mindset, long-term mindset, which is a really big challenge for enterprise, because they're wanting short-term for everything, because they just want to get to the next quarter, the next shareholder call, and telling them, like, this is something we're investing in and you'll see it, you'll see ROI a year or two from now. Like, they want to do it. They know they want to do it, but they don't want to prioritize it. They want the quick wins. And so, I think, tying back to the analytics side, like, being able to say, like, okay, this strategy will give you more leads and more revenue for 6 months and then they fall off. These strategies clearly create, larger lifetime value for these particular customers or product suites. Um, if they don't have that visibility in out of the gate, then we need to help them build it, because it's really difficult to make decisions for a business anyway that is long term unless you have that visibility. And most companies start out with just standard, like, did somebody fill out the lead form? Great, this ad campaign's running awesome, and they don't even follow through to how many actually paid. It was just getting it onto the sales team's floor. um, so I think that the discovery part is important. It's not just figuring out what assets you have and what debt you have with your tech stack or with your site. It's also about making sure that we can measure the things that you're going to hold us accountable to, and that we're able to identify what is actually moving the needle now. Because if we don't have that perspective, then guiding you on what is the best strategy to apply, or how do we prioritize strategies or channels, like, we're flying blind, and like that gap has to close as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Jake, we're running out of time on this discussion, and there are a couple of things that I want to get to, and I think they tie to kind of that idea that week to week, month to month, quarter, we're trying to get quarter to quarter, that kind of
Mhm.
a process that you outlined. Um, you know, we find that we're most successful in enterprise relationships when we're able to establish that long-term partnership, and we aim at that for all of our clients. In the context of enterprise, why do you find that to be so important for the long-term success of both the enterprise, and I guess the relationship, and making sure we have a long-term lasting impact?
Well, and the first one is just institutional knowledge, right? Like I have a number of corporate clients that we work with now that I've been working with that company longer than the points of contact have been
Mm,
working at that company. And
mhm,
every new person comes in and they've got new ideas, they want to try these things. And like, it's not that we're like, hold on, that's a bad idea, but sometimes it's like, we've tried that, here's what we learned, or that's on the roadmap, also exciting, but here are the dependencies. And so we're able to kind of shrink the discovery phase for new employees. Like, having that institutional knowledge over time also means that we get a better understanding for how all of those systems work.
mhm,
So when we go into this relationship at first, there's a lot of discovery on just like who's responsible for what is the sign off process, like if we want to launch a new feature, like where does this need to trickle through to get approval on. And so, like, as the longer our relationship goes, and with enterprise clients it's a lot easier, but the longer our relationship grows, then the more effective we can be with that particular client. A lot of enterprise clients, like, I've seen them hire an agency and they're like, we need results in 3 months, we need results in 6 months. And so, like, I mean, there's a responsibility on our consulting team to figure out, like, how can we sort of snipe these quick wins, because we need to build trust, right? Like, they
mhm.
want to like they don't know us, from other than whatever reputation we have, but like, they want to know like, can you guys actually move the needle? And we have to do that. So if we go in with like mass restructuring or like, your sites are disjointed everywhere, we need to fold them in. Like, even though that may be the obvious path that we have to take, there's, these, depending on how long we've been working with the client and what their goals are, we have to figure out what are the baby steps to deliver wins so that our point of contact, can look good for having hired us. The C-suite isn't questioning our budget, but simultaneously building up this, this foundation of long-term strategies that, as we get into the relationship, like 6 months, 9 months, a year, those other approaches start to just compound on top of the little wins that we have. Because, you know, we have to maintain, and it's the hardest thing, is like maintaining for the client this sort of I know better than you, series of projects that carry us forward for stability in the long term versus like all of those like the world's on fire today. I have to have an answer, like I have to have a solution. I have to show like our competitor launched these pages. Why don't we have those kinds of pages? Like, we have to deliver an answer so that point of contact doesn't look bad for not being able to deliver quickly on, industry pivots. Um, but we also have to maintain our you know integrity and responsibility for the long term survival of the enterprise. And we learned this years ago with link building, right? Like a long time ago, like everybody come in like, if we build links, we'll get rankings in like 3 months and it'll be amazing and we move on. It was like, yeah, but if we hit it at this kind of pace and do it this way, like in a year you'll have a penalty and you lose everything. And we lost a lot of clients. We fired clients because we would say like, we're not going to do that, because when it fails, you're going to blame us. And like, even though it is your call, like there's a line we have to draw on our own reputation and willingness to take risks. And like, some clients are okay, right? Like I mean, you want to take a risk, like we'll tell you like, let's launch another domain. Like we'll have like a throwaway
Yeah.
domain that we can do more risky things on. But like, you have to, as an enterprise, you've got to keep the flagship property like protected at all times, because that's what has to weather all of the other not just SEO changes and like those things, but like industry changes, competitor changes. Like you have to weather that. And I think that's it's one of the fun responsibilities of being a consultant on an enterprise account, because that is a balance that just it's a fight always.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Last thing I want to talk about, Jake, and I think you're already touching on this space, but I think it's important for us to talk about why an agency to enterprise relationships can fail, right? So are there some key sort of pitfalls, et cetera, that in your experience you can identify that kind of lead to those failures that, since we've seen them, we try and help our enterprise clients avoid, especially kind of in that early going, but even later in the relationship too.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like the communication side, right? Like, and like communication is key, blah, blah. But like, more importantly, like when you're working with multiple teams in an enterprise environment, like we're interfacing with the dev team, and like you've got to get the dev team to implement what you need, because they're getting pressure for things that are like like product uptime and support and new features, and none of it has to do with you know building out a new way to like implement redirects in bulk, or shipping log files. I mean, we have clients that like getting the server log files is in a backlog because their DevOps team is too focused on just keeping the lights on and they're stretched thin. And so, like whether it's sending them presents as bribes, or just finding ways that you can do part of the work for them. Like, so there, there's this aspect of um, ensuring that each person that you're working with within the org understands not only the value that you bring, but the value that you create as a reflection on them. And so, you can't, a lot of agencies will go in and start throwing people under the bus. Like we learned a long time ago, like sometimes you have to, like sometimes people just suck and you have to point it out. But most of the time, like those people don't suck because they actually suck. It's like a product of their environment, right? Like the pressures that
Mhm.
they're
Yeah.
getting and this kind of thing. And so like there's this relationship building that has to happen, and understanding you know the motivators, just like you as a company have to figure out what is motivating your customers so that you can build a better optimized landing page. Like as a consultant going into an enterprise, client relationship, like I have to figure out who are the key players, what motivates them, like how are they funded? Like we have like bonuses. I mentioned bonuses. Like I had one client that like if he could get the growth of this sort of redheaded stepchild property to a certain level, like he was going to get like a $20,000 bonus, right? And it wasn't until like the last minute that he was like, if we don't get this up, I don't get my bonus. And I'm like, well, if you had told me this, we would have prioritized things a little bit differently because we want you to get that, and like it worked out. But like at the end of the day, like without knowing what motivates those people and figuring out who you should attach yourself to, because the internal politics of a large company are crazy. Like they do layoffs. you know you find out 6 months in that like everybody hates Bob, and you've been over here trying to make Bob happy, and like it extreme stress and anxiety, and like come to find out like Bob's going to be getting fired soon, and like really yoking yourself to Bob makes you look bad. And so you kind of have to figure out like can I help him, or is he going to bring me down? And like so there's this politics that you have to play with enterprise that um I really think sets the difference between an agency ready for enterprise and those that aren't. Like you can have the most talented people in the world, you could have the best services, these types of things as an agency, but if you can't handle the politics of an enterprise, like you're going to cost people their jobs in the enterprise because you're going to screw up, you're going to say something you shouldn't to the wrong person, and then your point of contact is going to get fired or sent to HR or whatever. So like if you can't manage those politics well, then you're going to fail. And so I think for a lot of enterprise companies, like there needs to be this dating period, that happens with an agency. Like most enterprise clients, when they go to an agency, are sort of roped into like a 1 year contract because they're enterprise, right? Like they're like, you can sign a 1 year agreement. And like we don't do that intentionally because like there's this like personality fit that has to happen. There you have to understand the politics and communicate. And so like starting off with like a 90-day strategy where it's like we're going to spend 90 days on discovery and road mapping and prioritizing and transitioning to understand like what have you been doing and why, and like not coming in just changing the world, which most agencies come in and they want to hit you with a million deliverables because they want to prove their value, but they don't necessarily stop to figure out why is this done the way that it is now, and how do we shift it, and how do we do that without burning the guy who just 6 months ago dropped a $500,000 building out that feature. And now you're coming in saying that's dumb, don't do it. Like he hates you and you didn't even know it. So like there's this discovery period of figuring out what is valuable, who is valuable, what do people need, how does it work, and then being able to ship, all right, here's like wins in the middle, but like here's how we would then look at tackling these problems over the next 9 months or a year, and then you can engage in a longer term contract. But like that first part really has to be managed. And we come into agency or come into clients where they're vetting us as an agency, and they're like, yeah, well, we can't hire you for another 6 months because we have this other agency under contract, but we're trying to go ahead and get a replacement. And it's just like, ouch. Like ouch. Like, do you need another consultant to at least guide that agency so you're not just wasting money or heading in the wrong direction? It's like those things are painful for a company to deal with. And obviously we try not to lock people into those kinds of scenarios because it sucks for us all.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, Jake. Well, I think that's the first Hive Raw, man. You feeling all
Woo!
right about it?
You know what? This is fun. Like you said at the beginning, like ultimately you and I have these kinds of conversations every Friday already.
That's right.
Right? Like
We
just
sure
we
do.
we tend to share client names and employees and those sorts of things as we work through it. So I think filtering them out here worked out well, and
Yeah, it
and
did, no doubt.
I'm excited. I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to doing some more.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll get another one kind of scheduled and recording on the books, and we're gonna continue to try to improve like we do with everything else. So this is our first time, and we're gonna do it again. All right?
Thanks for listening. Reach out if you have any questions. Happy to help.
Yep. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thank you.